Hey, good morning, guys. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Philip, and this is the Driver's Side Chats. So it's a little bit early this morning. It's about 6:55, and I had to run to the hospital this morning to drop something off for my wife, who's a nurse, and that's why I'm up a little bit earlier. But I figured, hey, I might as well go ahead and do a vlog. So today's baby step is baby step 3, which of course anybody who's known the baby steps knows that baby step 3 is to have 3 to 6 months worth of emergency or cash for emergencies. So this is going to be your fully funded emergency fund. So this is what you're going to need to consider. So let's just pretend that you're living your day-to-day life, and you lose your job. And if you're a single income family, all of a sudden you've got zero income. And so that's why you have these 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. Now, Dave recommends 3 to 6 months. I recommend just go ahead and doing the 6 months. Just since you're at this point, we're debt free. We don't have, except for the house, we don't have a lot of debt. Go ahead and just build it up to 6 months, even if it takes you a little bit longer. Now, I will say, when you get to the 3-month point, go ahead and at least start investing in retirement and getting that kicked in. But go ahead and get that built up to 6 months. And even if you feel like you can, go ahead and jump it up even more. The more money you have to protect you, the better off you're going to be. However, don't get so big that you just got a ton of money sitting around that's not doing anything for you. Try some low risk investments that'll at least get you a little bit of a higher interest rate. And if you need to pull it out towards the end while you're running out of your emergency fund money, you can at least get it out and have some ahead of time thought, knowing that you're going to get it out. That we can discuss at a later time. But 3 to 6 months of emergency fund, it does a lot for you. But I want to give you a few things to look out for, things to consider when you're putting this emergency fund together. So let's just say that to function properly, you only need about $3,000 a month of after-tax income. So your net income, you only need $3,000 a month. Okay. Dave is basically saying, okay, so go ahead and have $9,000 to $18,000 set aside for emergencies. Well, that's the idea, having that much money. Now, there's another way you can look at it too. That could be your day-to-day life. If it costs you $3,000, that's covering, your luxuries in life, such as going out to eat, providing for some extra clothing here and there when you need it, or, going on date night or to the movies, giving away some money for people who do need it, and, things like that. You all of a sudden have, the survival budget, when you can cut those things out. And so say you can cut out another $500 a month, or however much it might be, then you might start looking at it from the perspective of, $7,500 to $12,500 or $15,000. I mean, whatever it might be, and that can be your survival budget. But now here's a little tip I want to give you when it comes to a couple of other things. You want to look at the risk in your current life. So, for example, in my life right now, we've been blessed enough to not have any debt whatsoever. No car debt, no credit cards, no student loans, no mortgage even. And, the potential risks that we might face are relatively limited. Now, when you're looking into this, you want to think about how you can protect yourself from things that could happen. So, from what I've been able to tell, and I could be wrong, I'm not perfect, so, I might not be totally right on this, but there are only 3 major catastrophic events that could happen financially in my life right now, to my knowledge. One is if my wife and I both lost our jobs, which of course takes out the income. Number 2, if we had a major vehicle replacement type deal where our cars got totaled, we're driving clunkers, so to speak. So it wouldn't surprise us really. It would, but it wouldn't surprise us if we had to get new vehicles. And when I say new to us, which could be expensive, or a major health concern. If something came up that just pulled 1 or 2 of us out of work for illness sake. So I'm sure you can understand how that could play a huge factor in it as well. So here's how you want to protect yourself from that as well. Or if you do have any debt at this point, maybe the things to look out for. Of course, you want to look for your, if you lose your job, there's not a whole lot you can do to really plan around that, because if you lose your job, you lose your job. Don't advise quitting a job without having another one lined up. But, if you get laid off, or even worse, if you were to get fired, then, you got to have something to at least fall back on. So that's one thing that's sort of unavoidable, and you really can't prepare for it as much. When it comes to your vehicle, of course, for us, we've been saving for a vehicle for a long time, knowing that eventually with a 200,000 mile Camry and a $180,000 Pilot, at some point one of those two cars is going to give. And those are both very reliable cars and could both make it up to 300,000 miles. I hope they do. But at the point that we're at, there's really no guarantee, because we're pretty up there in miles at this point. So having good insurance, for one, in case somebody does total your car, but still having the ability to purchase a vehicle if or when you need it. And then, of course, the last one is medical expenses. So at any point in time, anything can happen as far as illnesses go, just because there's so many illnesses out there and there's so many ways to pick up those diseases. So my advice is to go ahead and make sure you've got good insurance. And you're going to want to think about, insurance deductibles, how much you're going to have to pay out of pocket, and how much it could potentially cost down the road as well. So if your deductible is $10,000, in addition to having maybe the 6-month emergency fund, or maybe even the 3-month emergency fund, you may want to consider what your deductibles could be, and put that in there in addition, just because you don't know what that insurance cost can be. So just a little cost factor there you may want to consider, and that's a very real thing you might have to face. So for us, those are our big three. Now, we are at an advantage because right now we have a 2-income household. We both have full-time jobs, and we both receive full-time pay, of course. So that's another benefit that a lot of people do have, as opposed to the single income home. So, in our case, we have a lot more reason to rely on the 3-month emergency fund, just because we have 2 incomes, no debt whatsoever. But if you do have some debt, or if you're about to get into a little bit of debt, you need to think about the payments that you might have to take care of for 6 months worth, or a lot of different things like that, if there are any more debts in the picture or potential debts to come. But if there's a 2-income household and only one person loses a job, thankfully, even if you do go into survival mode, you might be able to live off one income just until you can get back up on your feet again. So, just think about those things. Consider the potential risk financially that you could take. And of course, the more liabilities or the more assets you have, the more you may want to increase. When we end up buying a home, I do intend on increasing our emergency fund substantially, just because when you do have a home, there are more things that could go wrong. Air conditioning units could go out, or you may need, I don't know, there's a ton of stuff that could go wrong when it comes to having a home. But just wanted to maybe run by some ideas for you, and just some things to think about when it comes to building up your emergency fund, because really, you just never know what could happen. You never know what could go wrong, and it's always good to have some preparation involved there, just because when something comes up, it comes up. Another thing I would consider, and it just depends on your financial well-being. I was actually talking to my brother, who's also not 100% Dave Ramsey. He and I are pretty similar in the whole views of it, but we talked about, do you stop building your emergency fund? Do you keep it at a certain dollar amount, or should you let it continually grow? Right now at this point in my life, my assets are relatively limited, and I feel like there would come a point to where essentially, because of a growing net worth, it's sort of going to grow anyway. So let's just think of it this way: when let's just say, and I'm just going to throw out some larger numbers here just because we're thinking 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road. So at this point, you've probably reached $1 million net worth. All right, so you've got, say, a $30,000 emergency fund because you are relatively wealthy and you've got some assets at this point. You need to make sure everything's covered. So let's just say $50,000 emergency fund. So all of a sudden things go bad and a lot of stuff's happened and you've got to come up with a lot of money for whatever reason. Okay, so let's just say, all right, well, you've blown through the $50,000 to keep up with what you were, just to keep up with survival because no income's coming in at this point. Well, what happens after that? Well, one of the things you can do to build your wealth is investments. We've got investments. So the next thing I'm going to probably go after is my investment accounts. Things where I've got some money that have been building up in the stock market. And, hopefully at that point that'll be a substantial account. And, I can take some money out of that to survive off of. And then when that goes down, I've got stocks. Just to make the difference, just so I can clarify my difference between, stocks and investments. I know they're both investments, but investments I consider to be like mutual funds, for example, as opposed to my stocks. It's just individual stocks that I personally own and I've gotten into. Another thing, when that all empties out, it's the last resort. You don't want to touch it unless you have to, but IRAs and 401ks. If you got to borrow money out of that or pull money out of that, even though it does come with a penalty, it's one of those layers of security. So having a large emergency fund is good to have, and that way you're just always prepared. But then to have, just layers and layers, even though they're not necessarily, they might be used as income tools, it's not necessarily going to be as bad of a thing when you have to pull some of that money out if you absolutely had to, because it's sort of another way of having an income. It's like when they say to building your wealth, have multiple sources of income. This is kind of the idea we're going off of, because when you lose one big source of income, you've got other ones to fall back on, and it kind of helps average out for your losses in case there are any. But that's really it for having your emergency fund. Just a lot of tips and some ideas. I never really got to cover how it's affected me personally, but I'll do that one in another video, possibly this week. And at that point we'll also get into the wealth building stage as well. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great day.